DNA testing, it frees prisoners, but should it free fathers from responsibilities of pregnancy, paternity, and the controversial campaign that asks, did she lie to you? On the record.
The technology of DNA testing has taken men off death row, but it can't take them out of the role of father. In some cases, men are forced to financially support a child even after DNA tests prove they're not the biological father. And it's got many fathers crying foul. One group is making its point with the controversial ad that ran in Sunday's New York Times. It depicts a visibly pregnant woman with the caption, "Did she lie to you?" Joining us from New York is the man behind the ad, Patrick McCarthy from the New Jersey Citizens Against Paternity Fraud, and in Philadelphia, attorney Gloria Allred. Welcome both of you. Patrick, first to you. What's your story? What's your beef?
What's my beef? My beef is really with individuals, primarily women, who falsely name a father as the child's father.
All right, so you have a personal experience, though. What happened to you?
I found out I have a daughter who is 18 years old. She's emancipated right now. I have no financial obligations at this point. I met all my obligations, but at the age of 15, after being divorced from my ex-wife for approximately 16 years, I found out that the child was not mine. At that particular time, at the age of 15, I petitioned the courts and talked to a number of attorneys who told me they would invoke equitable estoppel and not allow me to have the DNA test that I had done myself presented in a court of law.
All right, two things quickly. Number one is, had you been acting as the father, visitation, going to graduation, doing things a father should do in supporting the child?
No, not since the age of about 8 or 9. But yes, was there a bond? Sure, and I'm sure that's an issue that's going to be raised, the bond between a father and child. Because
okay, and at 16, you actually told her that the DNA test established that you were not the father, right?
No, that is not correct. At the age of 18.
All right. Well, and frankly, I will take issue. I mean, I'm curious why you would want to tell this child who thought that she was your daughter, but I'll move on. Gloria, your thought on whether or not a man should be able to get a DNA test to establish paternity even many years after the child's born?
Well, Greta, I think the most important point has to do with the protection of the child. And I think that child should be our paramount interest. I think the laws in many states which suggest that a man can challenge paternity within the first 2 years of the child's life and not after, unless there's fraud, are sufficient to protect the child. After a child is born, if he has a question, if he's not sure, let him ask for a DNA test then. I have no problem with that.
But what about a situation where
later is wrong?
But what do you have the situation, I guess we're going to get a little bit beyond that, but where DNA wasn't around, and you've got some man who never thought that he was the father of the child and has sort of been on the hook being the father and for whatever reason doesn't want to be?
Well, I guess biology means more to some of these men than being a father in the real way, in the important way that a person is a father, and that is caring for a child, loving a child, nurturing a child, being involved in that child's life. And if you've done all that, even to the age of 9, as apparently Patrick reports that he has, you've been acting as the father. And I think it's very hurtful to children to try to say later, guess what? My biology shows I'm not your father.
All right, Patrick,
Patrick,
I'm not in favor of women lying about that. If you're not
right.
the father, you shouldn't be the father. But, you seem like a little bit, in my view, a little bit of a jerk if you've been acting like the father for all these years and suddenly you want out.
Certainly, and let me clear that up. First and foremost, I continue to support this child. I would have continued to support this child regardless of what the law states. I do not feel men should be mandated by the courts to have to pay this child support. We have cases where men walked into a child's life at the age of 1 as a stepfather, was married to this woman for 10 to 12 years, acted as a father, but when it comes time for this woman and man to get divorced, he has no financial obligations. Why? Because he is not the biological father of that child.
But wait, there's such a thing, Patrick, as adoption. Maybe if it isn't a formal adoption, in some instances, if you have acted like the father, and for all intents and purposes, you might not have the paper, the dotted line, your father, but if you've acted like the father, why would you suddenly want to say, okay, that's done, I'm out?
Once again, I think that all comes down to the individual's choice. I do not believe the court should have the ability to mandate this. We have cases where children were switched at birth, and let's say 12 years down the road, they found out that they were switched accidentally at birth, and the courts ordered them to go back to the correct biological parents. There was a 1972 Supreme Court decision on that. So therefore, where is the idea of the bond of the child and father or parents at that point? They allow that in family court.
All right, let me give Gloria a quick. Gloria, you got 20 seconds. I'm going to give you the last word on this.
I think a lot of these fathers, I'm not saying Patrick, but a lot of fathers are just doing this to try to get out of a financial responsibility. But there are other responsibilities to children, like loving for them, like caring for them. And also this presents a very distorted view. Actually, the truth is most women don't lie about paternity, but a lot of fathers evade establishing paternity, and millions of them are out there and not taking responsibility for their children when they are the biological father.
All right, Patrick, Gloria, stick around. We're going to continue our discussion after this short break, and then fighting for a justice for... We're back with more on a controversial story proving paternity. Joining us again are Patrick McCarthy from New Jersey, Citizens Against Paternity Fraud, and in Philadelphia, attorney Gloria Allred. Patrick, back to you. Obviously, I'm in favor of a man being able to prove at the time of birth or a short period after whether or not he is the father of a child and not undergo a financial obligation or other obligation as a father. But as time passes, it's really hard for me to be sympathetic, especially when I think to myself there's adoption and people act as fathers. And secondly, you know, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, why would you get yourself into the situation in the first place? Why didn't you take some sort of protection and take some sort of steps so that you didn't get yourself in the fix? That seems rather irresponsible.
Okay, first of all, this child that I believed to father was in a loving relationship at the time. This was a relationship that I had no idea that she was committing adultery and stepping outside the marriage. And let me just say,
let me stop right there. Were you having unprotected sex with her at the time?
Sure. Because she was my wife at the time, and we had plans to have a child. And let me just say that this is not just an issue that men are going after. I have got numerous grandmothers and mothers who have called me and asked me, thank you for doing something about this, because we have many of our children who are going through this, and the court system is not acknowledging the wrongful issue here, and that is women stepping outside the marriage. And quite frankly, the ideal situation for lawmakers and for our judicial system to look at is what is right in the eyes of the court. And under the due process in the 14th Amendment, men are being denied that.
You know, Gloria, I mean, it seems pretty rotten if the woman is running around on her husband. I mean, you know, that makes it a little bit different than simply a man who's trying to run away from his responsibilities. Do you not agree?
Well, again, if there's doubt, they can get that ask for the DNA test early on, but determine it early on so that the child will be protected. And there's also another interest that's got to be protected in all this we haven't mentioned, Greta. That's the taxpayer. Because I can tell you, if we begin, you know, years later to let some of these guys out of the financial responsibility to their children, and I'm going to call them their children if they've had a relationship with them, then the taxpayers are often going to end up having to support the children. They're going to go under welfare. That means the taxpayers have to pay to support.
Patrick, one quick question.
Sure.
When you told your daughter at 18, or maybe not your biological daughter, but at least in my mind, she's your daughter.
Sure.
Number one, why did you feel it necessary to tell her?
Well, I think first and foremost...
And how did she take it?
I think first and foremost, why did I tell her? Because I think children have the right to know the truth of their biological and genetic makeup, especially with all the technology that has come along with DNA and genetic problems. I think that's something we owe our children. Our children's support should not come based on extortion and lies. And that's exactly what's happening in most cases here. And why did I tell her, and how did she took it? She actually handled it quite well, because I believe her mother had mentioned this to her some years prior, and she had knowledge of this.
And of course, I mean, you do raise the issue of the genetic history, which, you know, frankly, may end up being an important one as she gets older. Tough topic, Patrick, Gloria. Thank you both for joining us.